Hello and welcome to the Swine Disease Reporting System. That's the report number 92. My name is Guilherme Caesar here at the SDRS studio.
Hello, my name is Jovan Travis. I'm with the SDRS.
Hello, Daniel Linhares, also with the SDRS team.
And today we're going to cover the findings of September 2025. But before we go to the highlights, I have a pleasure to introduce our guest today, Dr. Daniel Boykin, that is joining us in the SDRS podcast today. Dr. Boykin received his DVM degree from North Carolina State University, and Dr. Boykin has a vast experience in swine medicine. He previously worked as a staff veterinarian at Christensen Farms, and then as a director of veterinary services at Cactus Family Farms. Currently, Dr. Boykin is a senior veterinarian at Smithfield Farms, overseeing swine herds in the U.S. In today's episode, Dr. Boykin will discuss the SDRS findings of September with us, and also the preparedness strategies that we can have for the winter. Welcome to the SDRS podcast, Dr. Boykin.
Thanks, guys. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Daniel, for being here. And to you and all the advisor member, thank you very much for all the service that you do for the SDRS. We really appreciate that. Guilherme, let's go over and give the highlights because Daniel is wishing to share a lot of things with us today.
Yeah, let's start with first, Giovanni, because it's our main topic of the podcast as well today, and that we have a sharp increase in the win-to-market category. We are achieving 40% of positive cases in the finishing sites, a lot of activity that usually starts in October, but we are having right now in September. And the advisory members, some of them highlighted that they have a lot of lateral introductions going on right now in September. And in the overall state level baseline, when we look to the historical data per state and compare with the current detection that we have nowadays, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, and North Carolina are having activity above the expected in September.
So PCR detection going up and any information about the sequencing, what's coming out there?
Yeah, Giovanni, that's a really surprise for us in terms of detection. We had a summer with a lot of activity of the L1C.5 that was above the expected compared with the historical data. And just for you to have an idea, put this information in number, the whole year of 2024, we have 3,235 detections of the L1C.5. And when we move to 2025 so far, so until the beginning of October right now, we have 3,327 detections. So 100 more detections compared with 2024. We are still having a couple months to finish the year of 2025. So a lot of activities pick it up in the summer, and we hope the winter is not going to be as bad as in the previous years, but it's also a possibility, and we might have a record detection in 2025. And when we look to the variant level, we see that the most responsible for that is the L1C.5.32, that in the previous years, we didn't have a lot of detections, was 951, for example, in 2024. And right now I have 1,734. So a lot of detection for this specific variant within the lineage L1C.5.
So if we do a brief recap, high activity of PRRS virus during summer, that was atypical, and now PCR detection going up, that's a signal of starting activity in finishing sites there. Thank you. And how about enteric coronavirus? Do you see some activity going on there?
Actually, not too much, Giovanni. For PED, for example, it remains in the winter market with 7% of positive submissions. It started to do an uptick in the last month, but it remains at 7%. And most of the advisory members, they mentioned that this might be activity from the previous breaks. It's not new lateral introductions of PED in the finishing sites. And the South Farm is also with a low percentage of positive submissions, only 3.6% of positive cases of PED. But when we look to the state level monitoring as well, 2 states are having activity above the expected for PD. These are Indiana and also Oklahoma.
Thank you for sharing that. Also some activity of PD going on. How about influenza?
And that's one that is increasing a lot right now, Giovanni, for the month of September. And in the winter market as well, that we achieved 34% of post submissions for influenza. And some of the advisory members also mentioned that they are having more coughing activity, more respiratory signs in the finishing sites that might be related to the influenza cases. And also we are having cases that are positive for PRRS and also influenza at the same time. Like we have an uptick of 10% of cases that were positive for both of the viruses. So more problem in the finishing sites because we have 2 respiratory viruses causing issues over there.
So interesting to see how this activity of respiratory pathogens starting to occur during fall. that's a sign for prepare for the winter time that's coming there. So one of the things that we talked about was about PRRS virus strains and movement around. Daniel, a couple of months ago, SDRS reported there was a movement of lineage 1C.2 to North Carolina there. And you are from this region, so would you mind share with us and remind the audience what are the practices that should be taking place when a new virus is detected entering a region? What can be the biosecurity, biocontainment measures to reduce the implications of such pathogen?
Yeah, sure. So, really, as a practitioner, we're very appreciative of the support that SDRS is providing with us to keep us informed about what's moving around and what's there. And as you mentioned earlier in the summer, which is not typically when we start to see much PRRS activity above normal, we did have the discovery of the L1C.2. And so in North Carolina. And the significance of this is that historically there was no lineage 1C of any variant in the southeast in North Carolina. And so this was a cause for concern for us, being a new variant in the area. And above that, one that has been circulating the Midwest for some years now and having a lot of clinical impact with production impacts of mortality and performance, morbidity, and such. And so it certainly was alarming to us to see this new variant showing up in our area. And so when we came to this awareness, then we wanted to figure out, well, did we just find it in this one farm, or is it in a lot of places that we have not diagnosed yet? And so the first thing we wanted to do was to try to get level set on, okay, is it in other areas? And as we started looking, I think it was discovered in a handful of farms during that time in early summer, and there was a lot of anxiety. People were anxious to understand, with a new variant that has been shown to be highly transmissible, would it begin to spread? I think that the other piece to that was, well, we primarily in North Carolina have dealt with the lineage 1A and didn't know if this would provide any cross protection, if it would help them to combat the clinical picture of the L1C. And with that too, I didn't know if it was going to maybe allow this new variant to spread more rapidly because there's not any of this cross protection. Thankfully, it was in the early summer and we had weather on our side, I think. And so the hot temperatures maybe suppressed the spread of this variant within our region. I don't know. Certainly that would only help to have the hot weather to help kind of have some limitations to how that might spread and such. But we have noticed that it has been fairly well contained, and so we are pretty happy with that. The farms that were impacted had similar production losses that have been referenced with this type of variant in the Midwest, but has been fairly well contained. We're on high alert as we head into fall and winter to see how that might begin to move around, but at this point it's been fairly well isolated.
And what would your advice be for people for regional control as far as practices to avoid either shedding or viremia or transmission between sites?
Yeah, whenever it came about, we took the special precaution because of the unknown about how it might spread more because we don't have this in our area. But ultimately, I think it can be viewed as PRRS virus, and the risks are similar between the variants. Now, some of them may have more virulence that have higher production losses and so forth, but as far as preventative measures and biosecurity practices, I think that they can be very similar. And so having monitoring programs in place to know where the virus is, being precautious about how we manage the live haul transportation,
Mm.
um, thinking about mortality management to isolate in any type of PRRS virus, but particularly as we knew that this was a new one, we wanted to heighten the awareness to even specifically this variant, just because of the unknowns as to how it might spread. And so we actually, at least within our production system, opted to further classify PRRS virus as L1C because it could be some of the other variants. We haven't seen any of the other variants of L1C at this point, but uh, you know, this is the only one, so we classify it L1C. And so it's different than any of the other PRRS. So predominantly the L1A is what's circulating around North Carolina. Now we say, well, we're going to have the same protection measures as far as biosecurity, biocontainment, and such, but with this, it's a further classification for us, just so that we can add a layer of precaution in this area.
hmm It's like you said, it's more of the same, but I mean, it's still PRRS virus, but it's more virulent. So what I hear you saying is that we still do the same practices, but now you gotta just be more careful, right? To get the compliance and the level of implementation higher. And then going back to this specific farm, I know that if each farm is gonna have their own protocol, but what are gonna be your high level recommendations? Should the farm get infected, what do you do right away as in the face of the outbreak?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one that if you ask a room full of swine veterinarians what their PRRS response plan is going to be, is you might get lots of different answers. So um, I think that there's a lot of good responses, um, but some of those include vaccination with a modified live virus. And so we do utilize modified live vaccine to try to provide some protective immunity in the case of these outbreaks. As far as another big component of PRRS management is a guilt plan. And so we want to, in these cases, try to minimize the number of guilt introductions. And so in these cases, you can bring and load the farm with gilts, how many spaces you've got available, and then stop the introduction so that we could say that the gilts are like kindling for the fire. And so when you bring in new gilts that are not a part of the herd, that they are a new population that can get exposed, and they become infected, and they shed at a high level for a period of time, and that creates a regional risk in the area, and also can lead to some instability within the herd. And so depending on what the parity structure in the farm is and the capability of trying to maintain some level of production, then we may opt to bring gilts in at the onset of an outbreak and then close the herd in an attempt to kind of quiet the virus down. And again, with the assistance of a modified live vaccine program. And there'd be other strategies as I referenced, but this is one that we tend to utilize fairly regularly in these cases.
All right, no, thank you. And how about for the growing pigs? Anything you can do or recommend for in that phase of the outbreak? You just got that L1C point 2 or point 0.5, and then what should people consider?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's been a lot of discussion in the area of wean to market biosecurity in the industry over the last few years. I think that many of us recognize that this is a huge opportunity within our industry, is wean to market biosecurity. And so one thing that we can do is be somewhat strategic about where we place these pigs, because we want to raise them. We want to get these pigs to market, despite that they are battling this disease. And so what we can do is try to find locations that we can place these pigs that maybe farther from other pigs, have a little bit of isolation, separation, particularly from our breeding herds. But similar biosecurity practices in terms of transport biosecurity management, making sure that if we're hauling these pigs on a trailer, that we're precautious about where we use that trailer for the next load. Similar practices that carry over with PED, et cetera. So transport biosecurity is very important. We may try to think about mortality management and doing what we can, depending on the method of mortality management that's being done at the site. If that's daily rendering pickup, then doing what we can about having some separation, emphasizing with all of our farms, having some separation with their mortality boxes, and then doing what we can in terms of flow of how those pigs are picked up and such. But that starts to get out of our control in some capacities. But biggest thing we can do is at the farm level, try to build as much separation from that as we can.
Thank you.
And Dr. Boykin, moving the subject a little bit, still talking about PRRS, but going more broadly to other pathogens as well. We know that winter is coming and then there's a lot of activity of respiratory pathogens. For example, we just mentioned influenza and PRRS picking up. So the question is how to prepare. How can we prepare our farms to the winter that we are having all this exposure of all these pathogens?
Yeah, we all know, and this goes back to what the work that you all are doing and others as far as helping us understand the patterns, the seasonal patterns of these diseases. And we know that as we're coming, you just mentioned when you went through the report that September we saw an increase in the industry on PRRS activity. It may have been a little bit earlier than normal, but in the same general time frame. As we come into the fall, we start to see some more activity. And so having that awareness is important, and sharing with our producers to be prepared. We get a little bit of a break during the summer, I think, just because of the seasonal impact that I referenced of the heat and everything, that we probably can get away with some stuff and not have the disease pressure that we do during the winter. But as we come into the fall, making the heightened awareness, just making people aware that it is active. We're going to see this. It happens every year. Be prepared. And so things that we will do is encourage farms to have these discussions with their staff, let them know now is not the time to let down the guard, follow all these procedures. So take the opportunity for maybe some additional training to bring everybody up to level set on being able to do what we know works. The processes, we're not coming with new processes. They're the processes that have been described and that they work. The showering in, bench entry before going in the shower. We do some staged loading to try to build some separation from transport biosecurity, which, I've already referenced as being a big risk. And another thing that we'll do beyond the training is on farms that have had some problems with disease breaks over the last year, we'll really prioritize going in with production management and doing some biosecurity auditing and seeing, is there some opportunities here that we are missing, that we feel like if we can clean this up, then maybe we can prevent an outbreak this year. And so those are some of the key areas. I don't know if you want to elaborate any more or have any specific questions for me in that capacity.
Oh, I think it's a perfect description.
Okay.
Well, I like that we're talking about regional disease control and elimination, right? And I think we as an industry need to talk more and more about that. At the meetings, we still talk a lot about what we're going to do with specific farms, and I think we should still do, right? But then there's an opportunity to talk more about what can we do together to push diseases out, either mitigate or their spread or control or eliminate altogether, right? And recently at the U.S. House of Delegates, the industry was there together talking about PED, national reduction or elimination. So can you talk a little bit about that and how we as an industry stand and next steps on that?
Sure. So I think that we can, I think it's been said a few times, we can claim success that we feel like we've eliminated TGE from the US. And so it's not been detected for some time now. And so whenever we think through the years, there's been some sector of our profession that has called out, we need to try to start looking at these other pathogens. PED, you mentioned Guilherme at the onset. The incidence rate is lower. It's at a low level now,
Correct.
but it's far from being eliminated. So it's kind of like we've been at this low prevalence for some time, but it's just holding there. It's just holding at this low prevalence. And so every year we battle this disease, and it's frustrating, and it causes a lot of production losses when it gets into a farm. And so the idea of potentially eradicating it from our industry is very interesting and exciting to many practitioners and production personnel alike. Is, if we can figure a way that we can potentially eradicate disease, then this is a success. And so I think it's good that there was a call out, and AASV came with the working group to discuss this idea, and one that I think that is important. I think that with how infectious PED is, and how we have some limitations on what control measures we have available to us at this time, that until we have some other tools, it may be difficult for us to completely eradicate. And so there's been a lot of discussion about the need for a modified live PED vaccine. I think that could be very helpful to give us some opportunity at success for eliminating that pathogen from our industry. There's been a good amount of work done talking about packing plant risks, and I think that the Swine Health Monitoring Project, the Morrison Swine Health Monitoring Project, that group out of Minnesota, they've got a project showing the docks where we're delivering the pigs to have a high level of contamination, and in many cases that makes its way back onto our trailers, and then it goes back to finishing sites to get more loads of pigs. And in some cases, those trailers are washed and disinfected. Other cases, they're not. And we have the risk of drawing that back out to our wean to market sites. And ultimately, as long as you have a reservoir of disease out in wean to market, then there's always going to be risk of it having some staying power and making it back to these breeding herds. And so I think that if we could get to a point where we have a modified live vaccine available, then it may be beneficial, because the biosecurity practices that we follow, we're very strict on monitoring and trying to keep this disease out, but it still has its way of finding its way in. And with the control measures that we have today, even with the low prevalence, we mentioned the immunity and risk with the L1C.2 and that we don't have it. Well, when you have a low prevalence, then you've got a lot of herds that don't have a lot of protective immunity to PED. And so if you have a regional pressure in that area, and a herd that doesn't have very much immunity, then there's going to be a big risk of them breaking, and it just keeps a perpetual pattern going, that we have a subset of farms that tend to break every couple of years. Whenever there's been some more demonstration about how long do farms go between breaks, and we've got a lot of farms that maybe have never broke with PED, and we've got some farms that have only broke once, maybe at the original onset with PED. And so those are probably some of the more isolated farms that have a real opportunity when following these strict biosecurity measures that they can keep it out. But in the areas of higher pig density where there is a greater risk of them having a closer geographic contact to a reservoir of PED virus and grow finish, then they're going to continue to have this risk. So, yeah, I think that it's a great initiative, one that we're all excited about, and we just feel like that we probably need another tool to help us bring that one to the finish line.
Yeah, and we continue to talk about when to finish, right? We talked about when to finish for PRRS. We talked about influenza today, and now PD. So it's an important reservoir and perhaps amplifying hotspot for those viruses. So, like you said several times here today, importance of biosecurity, biocontainment to avoid those viruses from spilling over. How about for mycoplasma? We at the House of Delegates, we also talked about mycoplasma, at least the first initial steps, right, toward mycoplasma regional control elimination. Are we ready?
Yes, mycoplasma is a tricky one. To this point, we're talking all viruses, and now we go to a bacteria, right? And one that has shown clear cost impacts. It costs the industry a lot of money every year. And there have been regions that have been very successful with mycoplasma elimination. I think with some years between the time that they made the elimination. I think that the important thing to consider with this one is that, well, first you have to establish at the multiplication level. You have to have negative gilts in order to have the opportunity of thinking about more vast or widespread elimination. Once you have the negative gilts, then it's possible. But within our commercial swine herds, the stability with mycoplasma is what we need to achieve first. And we're doing that by trying to, there's plenty of documented uh, examples of what needs to be done in order to achieve stability within the herd. We use vaccination, but it's killed vaccine and it works, but it's not going to be sterilizing immunity. And so we will try to expose our replacement gilts at a young age, intentionally expose the gilts at a young age to allow them to clear that bacteria so they're not shedding when they farrow their first litter. And so this is our attempt at this point, is to try to achieve stability. I think that there has been demonstrated success with eliminating, but the nature of how mycoplasma spreads within a population is really slow. And so if you have any issues with getting good exposure across all the animals in the herd, then it's hard to determine, that day zero. This is what is like the first important part of eliminating mycoplasma from a herd, is establishing a clear day zero. And day zero for a population dynamic is much different than an individual. And so if you've got a pocket of animals within the herd that maybe have not seen good exposure yet, and it hasn't made its way throughout all of the animals, then there may be a pocket of individuals within a herd that their day zero is many days, weeks, potentially months later. And so I think that is some explanation for what challenges we've had in the area of mycoplasma elimination. And so it's one that I think we're still continuing to learn what we need to do to accomplish it. The roadmap as to how to eradicate or eliminate mycoplasma, it seems clear. If you read the documents, and it seems like it should be easy, but we've proven in multiple occasions that it's not quite as simple as what is documented. And I think that exposure piece, getting the full herd exposure, is probably our biggest challenge. But we certainly have some interest. If we are able to continue to work on this, I think that if you can focus for some time on the stability piece, trying to have that routine gilt exposure so that you can run these commercial herds as mycoplasma stable and have a high level of stability. Then hopefully you can reduce the impact of mycoplasma on the downstream flow. And then through that process, then hopefully you've got a herd that has had good, clear exposure, and then you can think in time to come about eradicating. But there are regions within our country that have excellent demonstrated success with elimination. And I think that it's exciting to think that we can accomplish that. And potentially in these areas, then they can work towards eradication. And any time that we can accomplish that, then hopefully it has some staying power and can evolve, and we add other regions and that. But that one is still, we still have some work to do in mycoplasma for sure.
And you mentioned the importance of diagnostics before. This is one that seems like it's super important to, like you said, determine if the exposure was well done or not, and if it crossed the threshold that you consider enough, right, for that.
Exactly. And the trouble with that diagnostically with mycoplasma, just because of how slow it spreads and how then innately how difficult it is to diagnose, is you might have tested 20% of the animals in a breeding herd and they may all be negative, but there could be this one pocket in the farm that's positive. And unless you just happen to randomly test those, then you're not going to pick it up. And similarly, when you talk about confirming successful exposure, you might test 20% of the herd and they're all positive, but you've got potentially this one pocket that is not yet positive. And so short of doing testing on every single animal in a herd, you're not going to be able to confirm that. And statistically, we try to find the middle ground of where we have a higher confidence that what we're testing is a good representation of the herd, but that number is really high to get a higher confidence. And besides that, it's a really high number, and it's not a simple test. With PRRS or PD, you can get by with oral fluids. Mycoplasma, oral fluids is not a very sensitive test. It's not a good test for determining, and so you have to do the deep tracheal swab, which requires a lot more labor with snaring, and it requires some skill set, and so not just anybody can obtain this test. And so these are all some of the limitations that we experience.
If I recall correctly, numbers from Amanda Sponheim's PhD, I think it's almost 300 or so deep tracheals in a big herd. Like you said, it's and it's not a blood draw. It's a deep tracheal. You gotta have some skill.
Right.
And
exactly.
Sorry. And
No, go ahead.
guys, that's it for today for the podcast. Thanks, Dr. Boykin, for joining us in the podcast today. A really rich podcast that we talk about mycoplasma, PED, PRRS, influenza. So it's really like a class for multiple pathogens for the audience. And I hope you guys enjoy, and see you guys in the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great one. See you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.